In 2003, a state was dismantled. In its place, a new system was designed. It was built around a single clear promise: to prevent the return of a dictatorship. The design was meant to guarantee representation for all of Iraq's major groups: Shia, Sunni, and Kurd. In theory, it was a formula for stability, but the system did not produce stability. It produced a new form of conflict. It did not produce representation. It produced a machine for corruption. The very government designed to fix Iraq was, by its structure, guaranteed to break it. The failure was not an accident of war. It was embedded in the design. How did a plan for a new Iraq produce this outcome? How did a blueprint for power sharing become a blueprint for conflict? The answer is not just in the chaos of war, but in the core idea of the new government itself. An idea that was meant to be the solution, but became the root of the problem. To understand the post-2003 system, you must first understand the one it replaced. The Baathist state was a system of extreme centralization. Power was held by a small group, drawn largely from the Sunni Arab minority. The Shia majority and ethnic Kurds were systematically suppressed. When that state collapsed, the designers of the new Iraq operated from a single, overriding fear: the return of another dictatorship. Their solution was a system of power sharing, known in Iraq as al-Muhassasa, al-Ta'ifiyya, or the sectarian apportionment system. The idea had existed in Iraqi opposition circles for years. After the invasion, while not formally codified by the Coalition Provisional Authority, it became the informal architecture of the new state as Iraqi political parties negotiated the 2005 constitution. The logic appeared sound. To prevent any one group from dominating, power would be divided proportionally among them. The three highest offices were informally assigned: the president, a Kurd; the prime minister, a Shia; the speaker of parliament, a Sunni. Below this, ministries, government jobs, and state resources would be distributed along the same sectarian lines. Political parties would receive control of state departments based on their share of the vote within their own community. The stated intention was to ensure every group had a stake in the new Iraq. It was designed to manage division. But the system did not just manage division. It made division the central organizing principle of the state. The critical flaw in the Muhassasa system was not that it acknowledged Iraq's sectarian divisions. It was that it made those divisions the operating principle of the state. It institutionalized sectarian identity as the only viable path to political power. This process was cemented during the drafting of the 2005 Constitution. Negotiated primarily by Shia and Kurdish parties, the document established a federal system that, in practice, was immediately interpreted along ethno-sectarian lines. This created perverse incentives. If the only way to gain power is to appeal to a specific group, politics ceases to be a competition of ideas. It becomes a census of identity. Political parties had no structural reason to reach across sectarian lines. Doing so became a liability. Survival depended on mobilizing their base by emphasizing sectarian identity and fear of the other. The system did not just reflect sectarianism, it manufactured it. An Iraqi was no longer primarily an Iraqi. They were politically incentivized to be a Shia first, a Sunni first, or a Kurd first. This new political DNA spread from the highest offices in Baghdad down to local councils. The state itself became the primary agent of division, carving up the nation in the name of representing it. It was a nation-building project that began by dismantling the idea of a single nation. A system built on division produces predictable outcomes. The most significant was a vast and deeply embedded patronage machine. Muhasasa was not just about dividing power, it was about dividing the resources of the state. And in a country with immense oil reserves, the resources were significant. Here is how the mechanism worked. When a political party won control of a ministry, that ministry effectively became its property. The minister, chosen by the party, had the authority to award jobs and contracts. Qualification became secondary to loyalty to the party in control. The Ministry of Health might be run by one party, the Ministry of Electricity by another, and the Ministry of Oil by a third, each serving its own constituency, not the Iraqi people. This created a phenomenon of sectarian dependence. In an economy with few other options, access to a government job became contingent on allegiance to a sectarian party. The public sector payroll grew dramatically, from roughly 850,000 employees in 2003 to an estimated 3 to 4 million by the mid-2000s. This was not about providing services. It was about securing votes and ensuring loyalty. The result was systemic state-sanctioned corruption. From 2003 to 2014, billions in reconstruction funds vanished into a system of inflated contracts and ghost employees. Accountability became structurally impossible. Investigating a corrupt official was seen as an attack on their party and, by extension, their entire sect. The absence of response taught the system that it was insulated. It had learned to protect its own. A system that produces division and corruption does not create stability. It creates grievances. The first major consequence was the profound marginalization of the Sunni Arab community. Having dominated the previous state, many Sunnis were now largely excluded from the new political order. The coalition's policy of de-Baathification stripped hundreds of thousands from their jobs and social standing. This widespread disenfranchisement, coupled with a sense of being under attack by the new sectarian state, fueled an armed insurgency. The state's response, often sectarian in nature, deepened the cycle of violence. This created a power vacuum in Sunni-majority areas. It was in this vacuum of weak governance, corruption, and deep resentment that an extremist group like ISIS could emerge. Its rise was not an anomaly. It was a direct consequence of a state that had systematically alienated a large part of its own population. The system also failed its supposed beneficiaries. It fueled intense rivalries within the Shia political bloc. The political gridlock of 2021 and 2022, which saw factions unable to form a government, was a clear example. The system's design created constant fragmentation, making stable governance impossible even for the groups who held the most power. A system that produces division and corruption does not create stability. It creates grievances. The first major consequence was the profound marginalization of the Sunni Arab community. Having dominated the previous state, many Sunnis were now largely excluded from the new political order. The coalition's policy of de-Baathification stripped hundreds of thousands from their jobs and social standing. This widespread disenfranchisement, coupled with a sense of being under attack by the new sectarian state, fueled an armed insurgency. The state's response, often sectarian in nature, deepened the cycle of violence. This created a power vacuum in Sunni-majority areas. It was in this vacuum of weak governance, corruption, and deep resentment that an extremist group like ISIS could emerge. Its rise was not an anomaly. It was a direct consequence of a state that had systematically alienated a large part of its own population. More than 2 decades after its creation, the Muhassasa system is not in decline. It is deepening its roots. It is evolving from a political arrangement into the social fabric of the country. One trend is the persistent effort by some religious parties to dismantle Iraq's unified 1959 personal status law, which governs marriage, divorce, and inheritance. Though these efforts have faced legal blocks and public backlash and have not fully succeeded, the goal is to give each sect authority over these core life events. This would further erode the concept of a unified citizen, making sects into parallel social institutions. At the same time, the system's own checks and balances are being co-opted. The Federal Supreme Court, intended as a neutral arbiter, has issued verdicts that weaken the power-sharing model, for instance by chipping away at the autonomy of the Kurdish region. This trend points toward a tyranny of the majority, the very outcome the system was designed to prevent. The original logic was to stop a centralized dictatorship. But it has created a fragmented state captured by a cartel of elites who use sectarian identity as a tool to maintain power and plunder resources. In 2003, the goal was to build a government that would represent all Iraqis. The result was a system that taught them they were not one people. The al-Muhassasa system was born from a legitimate fear, but its design was a catastrophic failure in execution. It was a government that was never going to work because its core framework was a blueprint for conflict, not reconciliation. It made sectarian identity the most valuable political currency. It built a culture of corruption that hollowed out the state. It produced the very instability and disenfranchisement that allowed extremism to flourish. The intention was to prevent the return of an old dictator. The reality is that it created a new kind of unaccountable power, a collection of party bosses who rule without responsibility, enriched by a system that rewards division and punishes unity. The ongoing struggle in Iraq is not just about security or reconstruction. It is about the fundamental nature of the state. The protests of 2019 showed that millions of Iraqis want to build a common identity, but they are fighting against a political structure designed to deny them that future. The story of Iraq's post-2003 government is a warning that when you try to build a nation on the foundations of its deepest divisions, you risk cementing those divisions in stone.